Efficiency for Access Coalition. Today's webinar is focused on the efficiency for cooling, technology, and market trends. Before we begin, I'll quickly go over some of the webinar features. For audio, you have two options. You may either listen through your computer or over your telephone. If you choose to listen through your computer, please select the Mic and Speakers option in the audio pane. If you want to dial in by phone, please select the telephone option, and a box on the right side will display the telephone number and audio pin you should use to dial in. If you would like to ask a question, we ask that you use the questions pane where you may type in your question. The audio recording and presentations will be posted to the Solution Center training page within a few days of the broadcast and will be added to the Solution Center YouTube channel, where you will find other informative webinars as well as video interviews with thought leaders on clean energy policy topics. Finally, one important note to mention before we begin our presentation is that the Clean Energy Solutions Center does not endorse or recommend specific products or services. Information provided in this webinar is featured in the Solution Center Resource Library as one of many best practice resources reviewed and selected by technical experts. Today's webinar is centered around the presentations from our guest panelists who have joined us to explore emerging market intelligence on efficient off-grid appropriate cooling technologies such as fans, refrigerators, cold chain technologies, and ice makers. This webinar is part of the Efficiency for Access Coalition's Efficiency for Cooling Communications campaign, which shines a light on a range of topics such as the social impact of cooling, the latest off-grid technology and market trends, and how appliances fit within the broader cooling agenda, contributing to both increased energy access and greenhouse gas emission reduction. Before we jump into the presentations, I will provide a quick overview of the Clean Energy Solutions Center. Today's presentation will be moderated by Charlie Miller, who is a senior policy expert at Energy Savings Trust. Then, following the panelists' presentations, we will have a question and answer session where the panelists will address questions submitted by the audience. At the end of the webinar, you will be automatically prompted to fill out a brief survey as well, so thank you in advance for taking a moment to respond. The Solution Center was launched in 2011 under the Clean Energy Ministerial. The Clean Energy Ministerial is a high-level global forum to promote policies and programs that advance clean energy technology, to share lessons learned and best practices, and to encourage the transition to a global clean energy economy. 24 countries and the European Commission are members, contributing 90% of clean energy investment and responsible for 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions. This webinar is provided by the Clean Energy Solutions Center, which is an initiative of the Clean Energy Ministerial. The Solution Center focuses on helping government policymakers design and adopt policies and programs that support the deployment of clean energy technologies. This is accomplished through support in crafting and implementing policies related to clean energy access, no-cost expert policy assistance, and peer-to-peer learning and training tools, such as this webinar. The Clean Energy Solutions Center is co-sponsored by the governments of Australia, Sweden, and the United States. The Solution Center provides several clean energy policy programs and services, including a team of over 60 global experts that can provide remote and in-person technical assistance to governments and government-supported institutions, no-cost virtual webinar trainings on a variety of clean energy topics, partnership building with development agencies and regional and global organizations to deliver support, an online library containing over 2,500 clean energy policy-related publications, tools, videos, and other resources. Our primary audience is made up of energy policymakers and analysts from governments and technical organizations in all countries, but we also strive to engage with the private sector, NGOs, and civil society. The Solution Center is an international initiative that works with more than 35 international partners across its suite of different programs. Several of the partners are listed above and include research organizations like IRENA and the IEA, programs like SE for All, and regionally focused entities like the ECOWAS Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. A marquee feature of the Solution Center that the Solution Center provides is the no-cost expert policy assistance known as Ask an Expert. The Ask an Expert service matches policymakers with one of the more than 60 global experts selected as authoritative leaders on specific clean energy finance and policy topics. For example, in the area of appliances, label, and standards, we are very pleased to have Eric Gibbs, Senior Director of Country and Regional Practices at CLASP, serving as one of our experts. If you have a need for policy assistance in appliances, label, and standards, or any other clean energy sector, we encourage you to use this valuable service. Again, the assistance is provided free of charge. If you have a question for our experts, please submit it through our simple online form at cleanenergysolutions.org/expert. We also invite you to spread the word about the service to those in your networks and organizations. Now, I would like to hand it over to Charles Miller.
Thanks very much. Only my mum calls me Charles, but thank you. My name is Charlie Miller. As Philip mentioned, I'm a senior policy expert at the Energy Saving Trust. Energy Saving Trust, jointly with CLASP, acts as the secretariat for the Efficiency for Access Coalition. Next slide, please. In our webinar today on cooling, sorry, let me talk a little bit more about the Efficiency for Access Coalition first. Just to introduce the coalition is a global effort to promote energy efficiency as a potent catalyst in clean energy access and sustainable development more broadly. It was founded in 2015 and in that time has gone from being a year-long call to action and collaborative effort under Global Leap and Sustainable Energy for All to a coalition of 13 aid agencies work together to promote high efficiency, high quality, and low cost appliances. The aim of the coalition's programs is to accelerate technology innovation, to reduce the prices of these new technologies and the products that they're enabling, and through those two mechanisms to accelerate the scale up of markets for off-grid and weak grid appropriate products. The coalition also has a role in sharing information amongst its members, improving sector-wide coordination, and support gaps and opportunities to do more to bring forward the day where everybody has access to efficient appliances. The Efficiency for Access Coalition has programs and initiatives across 3 continents, 44 countries, and 19 technologies, so a pretty impressive breadth of activity. Next slide, please. We are currently running a cooling communications campaign. This is building on our previous agricultural technology campaign, which some of you may have seen. The aim of the campaign is very simple. It aims to shine a light on the efficient cooling sector, which is not a particularly big or well-known sector, but one that I would say is attracting more and more interest from players within the sector, both on the government and the private sector side. So with this cooling campaign, we aim to showcase the latest trends in technologies, in products, in business models, but also to begin to articulate what the key market barriers are at this relatively early stage in the emergence of these new technologies, and what the potential solutions for those market barriers might be. The scope of the campaign covers efficient fans, which can be anything from small-scale fans in East Africa intended to improve household quality of life, through to much larger fans, for example, in Pakistan, where access to cooling technology is actually a health issue because of very high temperatures. We're also looking at refrigerators, everything from basic household refrigerators through to much larger refrigerators for business and industrial use, as well as walk-in chillers and other agricultural cold chain technologies. The campaign has 3 phases, building from a more general phase at the outset to more technical content towards the end. And we would invite any participant on the line that has some insight or information to share about their work in cooling that they would like to be promoted as part of the campaign to get in touch with us, and we'll see what we can do to pull content from the experts, many of whom I'm sure are on this call, and to share that widely across the sector. Next slide, please. And this slide is just to quickly make you aware of some of the resources and publications that have been produced under the E4A Coalition. We have a number of available reports. Perhaps the flagship is the Off-Grid Appliance Market Surveys that have been conducted every 2 years. And one is in draft at the moment, so watch this space for the next one of that. A number of other publications there that you can go online and find on our website, as well as a handful of up-and-coming reports, some of which will be showcased today. The idea with our webinar here is to really provide a kind of a teaser of forthcoming publications where we've pulled the data together, we've done some analysis, we haven't written it all up yet, we haven't published it, but we just wanted to give stakeholders a sneak preview of some of the findings, because we feel that there's a real appetite for the kind of information that our panelists have to share today, and are keen not to keep people waiting until the finished product is out. So watch this space. More launch and dissemination activities will be taking place when these publications are released. But in the meantime, this is just a teaser to whet your appetite and give you an early opportunity to ask some of the people involved in developing these publications and doing this research some questions live. And with that, I will hand over to our first presenter, Fadzai. Fadzai is a strategic consultant at Dalberg Global Energy Advisors. She's got a background in inclusive business, renewable energy, financial inclusion, as well as a number of other areas. Previous to Dalberg, she was also working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and has also done work with the GSMA and on financial inclusion as well. So a real range of experience from Fadzai. After Fadzai, we will hear from Naya, who is a manager within CLASP's East Africa office. Naya has a lot of experience working on off-grid appliances in general, I would say, as well as a background in social enterprise and the non-profit sector. And then finally, Jeremy Tait from the Refrigeration Technical Working Group at Efficiency for Access, a highly experienced consultant working on standards and labeling for electrical appliances, and the policies and regulations that have enabled those appliances to become more efficient and more sustainable. He's got experience working across refrigeration, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And he's been leading our refrigeration technical working group over the last few years, and he'll be sharing some insights from the process of putting together a refrigeration roadmap. So with that brief introduction to our speakers, I'll hand over to Fadzai to go first. And thank you all for joining us today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to Charlie. So I think maybe before we dive straight in, I'd like to provide a little bit of context around Dalberg, just in case some of you have not come across us before. Dalberg is a group of businesses. We have 18 offices globally, and we typically partner with governments, private sector players, research organizations, a whole host of individuals within the development space to provide an innovative mix of advisory, investment, research, and design services. We have previously supported CLASP and EFA in 2015 to conduct the previous State of the Off-Grid Appliance Market Report, which assessed the state of technology for off-grid televisions, off-grid fans, and refrigerators, as well as, of course, projecting the state of the market from 2015 to 2019. This year, we've been involved again in doing a second edition of this report, which reassessed the market and is projecting for the same type of appliances what the market would look like between 2019 to 2030. But we've gone a step further than that and have also started to look at effective business models that could potentially drive supply, as well as enabling factors to drive deeper penetration of appliances and in particular refrigerators in Asia and Africa. So it's from this that we would like to share some of our insights for the refrigerator market. We'll focus a lot on the relevance of cooling technologies for households. So what is the real impact? The state of the market as well today, and what are some of the barriers that we're seeing to growth? A little bit of insight around some of the key key industry players that are driving product innovation, and how supply chains are also adapting to be able to cater for these larger appliances. And then we'll finish off with our future projections, which I think everyone is excited about, because the industry does take a lot of cues around, where do we think market potential will be for these appliances. And just a light touch on areas where we think there should definitely be more focus to enable the environment going forward. So what is the impact for cooling appliances today? So we've looked at this in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, one of which is obviously around no poverty. And we definitely see affordable access to new technology being an important part of this first Sustainable Development Goal. So being able to ensure that we have the right of cooling technologies really is a critical component of that. In addition to that, around zero hunger, we've seen that access to refrigerators actually allows a lot of families to store food safely and for longer periods of time. There's quite a lot of research, not a lot, there's still new research that's been done around that, but we know that some of the stakeholders we've spoken to have said that customers have mentioned, areas such as the ease of fewer trips to the market, being able to bulk and save produce because you can actually buy in bulk, and also cooking less often, which can translate into some savings on charcoal as well, being some of the benefits that households see around being able to store food appropriately and have safe food for longer periods of time. There's also a great application for refrigerators when it comes to reducing risks of food-related infectious diseases. We've also seen that beyond that, in the healthcare space, there's definitely strong value propositions that are starting to come into play for how to get last mile healthcare services out using refrigerators and different types of cooling technologies there. Finally, from a gender perspective, there's definitely an interesting role that refrigerators play in time poverty for women. There's definitely a lot more research that needs to be done into this area. There's conflicting messages in some cases around whether it really does lead to tangible impact for women, but we definitely see this as an opportunity as women could spend less time on domestic tasks. So knowing that there is relevance for this type of market, the next thing we wanted to pay attention to is what is important, what is the impact at the stage of cooling technologies on sales. So the current state of the market, to do this, we looked at some data that was provided by Gogla. They have been engaged in trying to understand, what is the state of sales across sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. And interestingly enough, 70% of the suppliers who reported their data to Gogla actually found that most of their sales for refrigerators were in sub-Saharan Africa. 70% does sound high, but putting it in nominal terms, the market is still quite small. In 2018, we see that only 5,900 off-grid refrigerators were actually reported as sold, 4,000 of which were in sub-Saharan Africa. And so there are still several barriers that are impacting, penetration of this particular product across emerging markets. The first one is really around the price point. It's definitely no mystery that this is still a challenge. You tend to find that on average, televisions would typically cost about 200, they would need to go down to 200 USD before they are considered affordable for a rural off-grid customer. At the moment, we're finding that with current retail prices for a 50-liter off-grid refrigerator, that would range anywhere between $270 US dollars to $500. And that's quite a conservative estimate, but that's the range that we're hearing from different stakeholders. That would mean that current prices would have to go down by a minimum of at least 30% for this product to start to make sense for the type of market that we'd like to address. Another challenge is, sort of changing the demand for households when it comes to refrigerators. So we find that a lot of customers have adapted their lives to not necessarily require refrigerators. And so there are significant challenges for individuals who are driving these products, and how do they create the right type of marketing and sales proposition for a potential customer. In addition to, of course, the high price point that they would be dealing with. The last area is around high energy consumption of current refrigerators. So beyond price, daily consumption is still too high. And we're seeing that for refrigerators to be ideal for the current sorts of solar power and other renewable energy power sources that are available, refrigerators would need to consume around 0.2 to 0.3 kilowatt hours per day. The current average is substantially higher. It's somewhere between 0.5 to 0.7 kilowatt hours per day. And so as the market is still quite nascent, there's definitely ongoing development that's required to improve energy efficiency and also create more affordable technology going forward. So based on what we know around the barriers at this stage, we've also done a little bit of research to understand how has efficiency or performance evolved over time. We definitely find that a lot of products are still, not as efficient as we would ideally want. Sort of under optimal conditions, most products would actually require a solar panel and system that would be able to produce more than 200 watts overall. So we're finding that there's definitely still a huge disconnect between what we see as energy efficient and how we anticipate, sort of the prices changing, and obviously the level of R&D required to do that as well is still quite high. So there's still a lot to focus on in terms of creating the right type of product innovations. There are three primary products that we definitely think are starting to head in the right direction and are driving the market when it comes to thinking about these challenges. The one is Sundancer, which some of you might know actually won the Global Leap Award for the best 50-liter fridge. They've managed to get their energy efficiency to almost directly at 0.118 kilowatt hours per day. And that's significantly much better than most of the other products that we're seeing in the market. Fosera has also recently been developing their own 54-liter refrigerator. I think they mentioned that that's meant to be released in May or June this year. And that aims to consume around about 0.2 kilowatt hours per day as well. It's also one of the first models to be designed specifically for the off-grid appliance market. So really exciting areas that we're seeing a lot of product innovation there. The last one, which is quite interesting, is Embraco. Traditionally, obviously more focused on compressors, but they actually have further customized to bring up a fridge with Yuma that is not only able to improve their energy efficiency and actually the ability to measure that, but they've also sort of developed some of the first smart software integration system that allows companies to electronically adjust the refrigerator performance according to the external conditions and the battery load that they see when they actually set up that product on site. In addition to that, I think what's quite interesting about this product is the manufacturer can obtain day-to-day analytics on the performance of the product. And that has been used to actually inform what will be used to inform future product design. And I think it also starts to create an interesting case for the potential for Paygo to become an interesting, to have the ability to actually switch on and off a refrigerator. If that comes into play, that will definitely affect some of the affordability barriers that we see as well. Another area we focused on beyond just, understanding the technology and understanding the affordability barriers was what is the current state of play of different actors across the value chain that would actually be providing these appliances. And so what we came up with was essentially 10 different types of stakeholders that operate across the value chain to provide off-grid products. We've typically found that when it comes to refrigerators, the majority of players that are starting to bring these products into the market would be your traditional vertically integrated manufacturers. By that we mean stakeholders who perhaps were actually, traditionally solar home system providers, the likes of Copa, B-Box, and have actually realized that to continue to drive demand for their products, they actually need to start coupling that with appliances as well. We've also seen that in leading markets, so what we are terming as a leading market is typically the likes of India, where there's high access to finance, so some of the affordability barriers are taken away. There's also, sort of high evolution of these different types of actors across that market. So lots of different players are in that value chain. In those types of markets, we've also seen a wider range of product models entering into the market, mostly driven by local distributors and retailers in partnership with a vertically integrated business or manufacturer. And what's interesting about that is, as we see these types of local retailers coming into the market, there's definitely opportunity for them to specialize more and be able to actually handle some of the distribution challenges that come with larger appliances that also require setup at point of sale. So we've definitely seen that in markets that are more developed, that's happening. There are cases in nascent markets where this chain is not well developed. So to give you an example of a market like Ethiopia, for example, you might not even have, any branded manufacturers that have strong capabilities and presence within the market themselves. They'll typically have a representative who would work together with one or two new local distributors or wholesalers to distribute products. So in areas like that, there's definitely much more need for emphasis and focus around sales and distribution and after-sales support when it comes to larger appliances such as refrigerators. Another interesting area that we started to explore, and you might notice is not shown on this particular slide, is who are some of the ecosystem actors that can also drive demand. Here, we're definitely starting to think about mini-grids and mini-grid players being a key driver of demand. I think, in general, we all know that refrigerators can be an important driver for household consumption of energy overall. So this is definitely an interesting area to start looking at how best do we get mini-grids into this ecosystem so that they can create the right type of demand for this product. That said, we're not yet aware of any significant initiatives which have targeted fridge sales at sort of mini-grid sites. But we think it's a matter of time. It's definitely an area that will probably become more interesting for them. The one challenge will definitely be around the power source. Mini grids, at least in Africa, are often AC power, whereas most off-grid appliances tend to be DC. So we'll need to think about, an inverter would be required in that particular case, and that would obviously carry an extra cost as well, which goes back to some of our price and affordability challenges there. So based on all of this, we went ahead and decided to get a sense of what we think the potential serviceable household market for off-grid refrigerators would be. I'd like to continue to profess that this is specifically for the household market. We have done some additional research to understand cases for the SME space, for example, where we definitely think there's a stronger productive use case there for this particular appliance. But for now, we just wanted to get a quick sense of what is the potential at the household level. Typically, what we found is that we anticipate the largest growth will be driven by Asia, and specifically India in that market. This is largely due to our assumptions around decreasing prices over time, which would typically bump up the number of households that would actually be able to afford an entry-level refrigerator. There's also a lot of uptake already of some of the more entry-level off-grid appliances in a market like India. So we've already seen the boom of fans in that particular market. We've also seen off-grid television starting to come into play and really growing as well. And so we're seeing that it's more likely that that type of customer will be able to actually transition and look for other types of larger appliances. Another factor here with India as well would definitely be the ability to stack energy. So we're seeing a lot of households in India that would switch between solar power in rural areas and some of the access to the grid or mini grid power as well. And so we definitely see that particular country driving a lot of the growth for refrigerators. Our estimates for sub-Saharan Africa are a little bit more conservative. Countries such as Sierra Leone, Uganda, they're still unable to absorb this type of product at this stage. There's definitely a lot of interest from a lot of the ecosystem suppliers and players in the space, but we definitely think that the market still requires a little bit more focus on areas such as access to consumer finance, establishing the right types of distribution channels that go beyond your traditional solar home system players. And with that, over time, we will definitely see that uptake, but it will be a little bit more conservative than what we're seeing in Asia. So based on all of this, what then needs to happen to accelerate growth in sales and uptake of off-grid refrigerators? From our perspective, definitely there needs to be continued investment in R&D, particularly to improve energy efficiency and as well as the performance just generally of cooling technologies. I think there's a lot that could be done in terms of also incentivizing the entrance of global white good players into the off-grid cooling market. That would definitely also accelerate the technology developments in the space. At the moment, we haven't seen a lot of that going on, but we definitely think that's an area that's really important. From a customer perspective, I think there's a need to have greater insights into household demand and stronger productive use cases, particularly for SMMEs, as we've mentioned before. We did some interesting research in Kenya around that, where we tried to assess what the potential scale of that market could be. But also these insights will really help to assist a lot of the businesses to effectively market these products and really understand where the needs are for the different types of segments that they need to address and tap into. Financing across the board continues to come up. Of course, consumer financing will definitely be critical for this type of product. But beyond that, we're actually seeing that there also needs to be dedicated financing for some of the off-grid appliance players. An interesting example of this was in Ethiopia, where we spoke to one of the industry associations, and they mentioned that they were partnering with the World Bank and the local development bank in Ethiopia to sub-grant working capital loans for importers and wholesalers. And just being able to unlock that type of barrier really creates the right type of environment to expand the market and to deepen their capabilities to bring in products. We've seen a lot of applications as well of results-based finance, particularly more for TVs and lighting products, but we definitely think there's an opportunity to use that type of mechanism to drive innovative distribution to the last mile. So how do you make sure that you actually incentivize some of those local distributors we're seeing come into the market, so that they would be willing to go into communities that are a little bit more challenging to invest in and distribute products. Finally, policy. It continues to be the hot topic. We've seen mixed responses from different governments across sub-Saharan Africa. Some who have, really taken to task removing tax exemptions, creating the right types of incentives for solar products to come into the market. Others which have seen and perceived these products as luxury goods, and so are not really seeing the link between driving these products and increasing energy demand in their respective countries. So there's definitely a lot of need to focus in those areas as well, and we definitely go a lot deeper on that in the report. And then, of course, quality assurance becomes really important as we start to see more products in the market. There's a strong need to really make sure that we are ensuring they're the right standards and we don't, end up with market spoilage. And so these are some of the areas that we definitely think need to be paid attention to going forward. I'm going to hand over to Nyaya, who will be the next presenter from there.
Actually, we're going to go to Jeremy from now, a little bit out of order, but Jeremy?
Okay.
Hi, yes, Jeremy Tait speaking. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
You sound fine, Jeremy. Thank you.
Right, and I think my transfer to my screen has hopefully also worked, so you should see my first slide. Yeah, so my name's Jeremy Tait. I've been very pleased to be the facilitator of the Technology Working Group, working for CLASP and the Efficiency for Access Coalition. And the task given to myself and the Technology Working Group of stakeholders was to develop a technology roadmap for off-grid and weak grid cooling appliances, and that's basically what we've done over the past year. And I'm going to present to you the findings, the main findings that we came up with, and the complete roadmap document will be published during next month. And at the end of the presentation, I'll give you the details of how you can sign up to make sure that you do get a copy of that if you're interested. So I should probably start by saying what a roadmap is, or at least what the roadmap as we have done it, to explain what we were trying to do with this. So basically, the roadmap is a tool to identify and coordinate the initiatives and the investments that are needed to develop a particular market. In this case, clearly off-grid and weak grid cooling appliances. The initiative is, the roadmap process is very much a consensus-based process. We engaged as many stakeholders as we could to try and get a good amount of feedback and steer and a lot of input from those stakeholders to make sure we reflected the consensus of those that we were talking with. So we started looking at the needs, we looked at the products that would be needed to develop that market, and then the technologies, and finally the R&D needed to enable those technologies. So that process has gone on for the past year. And here we go. Right, so what I'll talk about in this session are firstly just to clarify the scope. We've heard about a lot of different types of cooling equipment in the past half hour or so. I'll just clarify exactly what we had under the roadmap. I'll just talk to you very briefly about the way the stakeholders were engaged in that process, and then really looking at the results. A few words about the status of the market as we understand it now. So this is based on the stakeholder feedback we had. It's not so analytical as what you've heard from Fadzai just now. It's more anecdotal, but I think some valuable insights nonetheless. And in that section, we'll also look at the challenges and the needs we've identified, and many do chime exactly with what you've just heard, so I won't dwell on those. And then we'll move on to talk about the priorities to develop this market in future, and this is mainly the technologies. That's really what we're aiming at. But along the way, the stakeholders did identify quite a lot of other supporting initiatives that are going to be necessary to help this market develop. And I do want to talk briefly about some of those, because they are I think almost as important as some of these technologies if we're actually going to see this market develop in a way that is economically sustainable as well as environmentally sustainable. So yeah, we'll mention some of those, and I'll finish with just a brief idea of the next steps that are happening in this particular project area. So the appliances that we talk about for this roadmap, we focused in on the household and small commercial type applications, and we looked at storage of foodstuff and generation of ice. And we particularly were looking at the types of product, the types of technology that are going to benefit those in the rural and peri-urban environments, so around the cities, not in the cities. It's the sort of lower income, low resource environments. We're aiming at appliances that can really help build access to the services and benefits to those who are just not finding that accessible so far. So we're very much trying to build on those sustainable development goals through this particular development work. So we were focusing on those types of appliances in the size range, sort of 50 to 80 litres at the small end for the very small units used in households, or and then up to about 180 litres internal volume or so for the small commercial type appliances. And as we've looked a little bit at sort of the small agricultural type markets, yeah, we might see appliances, equipment going up to a cubic meter, maybe that sort of size. But in this particular roadmap, we deliberately did not try and address the technologies associated with walk-in coolers or with bulk milk chillers or the sort of semi-industrial type cooling equipment. We acknowledged that there's some good synergies with some of that, indeed, particularly on developing the industries and the supply chains, but this roadmap was focused on the smaller end. And also we quite deliberately set aside the technologies involved in the vaccine refrigerators. We did look at that for technology transfer, but yeah, we weren't trying to look at the development of the vaccine fridge market. During the process of the roadmap, we did actually realize that we had to also look at transport refrigeration, so chilling of small volumes of produce from small farms, small holdings, etc. And we did also add that to the scope as we went along, and I'll mention a bit about that later. So the process of the roadmap, basically we started back in May with a workshop in Amsterdam. We had 45 or so stakeholders there, and out of that workshop we grew a technology working group, invited a wider range of stakeholders. We eventually got around 60 to 70 stakeholders, varied backgrounds. These were components and appliance manufacturers, test houses, developers, experts, researchers, NGOs, associations, and other types. We were very pleased to get a wide range and lots of very positive input from the group. And over a process of just under a year, we had 3 separate large conference calls with a cross-section of those stakeholders, but we also had 4 breakout groups looking at particular topics along the way, and an awful lot of bilateral and desk research done through to the point where we developed a draft roadmap in December. But coming out of that process, we actually also produced a paper about the categorization of appliances. So this was looking at the characteristics that define these products, their performance characteristics, and really all the building blocks of a very detailed technical specification for these appliances. So that document is available and will actually be annexed to the roadmap document itself. So you'll be able to see that. And we also did a paper on future test methods, and we'll return to that a bit later. So we had a lot of very good input to the draft, and the final draft will be published, will be completed during June and published, and that'll become available to you. I'll show you how to find out about that at the end of the presentation. So it was a great process, lots of engagement, and we did get some pretty good consensus. And this is a very simplified summary of the consensus of the current market. And as I say, this is very condensed. The full roadmap has a lot more of a nuanced explanation of these markets. Inevitably, there are going to be things here which people will say, hang on a minute, that's not true of the bit I know. But yeah, I'm trying to give an overall impression, and yeah, at the risk of not giving the sort of detail which people will want to see on this slide. But basically, I should also point out that the stakeholders we talked to were, the majority were based on African experience, which is an interesting contrast to the description that you just heard from Fadzai. So yeah, there may be some differences here in some of the detail. But this feedback we got reflects what's out in the market now, and some of the things you've been hearing from Fadzai, like coming out of the Global Leap test program, clearly that's the brand new products that aren't yet in the market. So that's something else to bear in mind when you're comparing what you're hearing today. So at the household level, I'm afraid it was quite a pessimistic picture, really. Consensus view was that we've got some very challenging economics to deal with here, which has resulted in quite low penetration. We have the fridge being a very disruptive influence on the solar home system in the off-grid situation. Certainly, a fridge would tend to increase the power demand by probably a factor of 3 from a typical household solar household system. Compared to the appliances that are typically used, the TV, the light, the fan, the phone charger. And probably looking at something like 5 times the total cost of the usual set of household appliances. So yeah, and in a situation where the fridge is not going to be run for all of each 24-hour period, perhaps, either from not the power availability, or the owner can't afford to supply that power for 24 hours a day, they're clearly getting a pretty reduced service from that fridge anyway. But it's much more positive outlook for mini grid and weak grid area for households, but still economically challenging. And we do think that the absence of pay-as-you-go accessibility for these units at the moment is potentially a limitation on growth there, particularly in the African market, although there are other markets that could be exploited without that pay-as-you-go compatibility, perhaps. So uneconomic on the majority of possible situations for households, but we found a much more promising outlook for small commercial cooling. So this is kiosks, small shops selling or looking to sell cool drinks, perhaps frozen drinks, some other food types, but beverages were a large part of the target market there, and we're getting a lot of interest, a lot of demand. The economics make a lot more sense when you've got the productive use situation, you've got a revenue that you're building, and we're seeing some very good evidence of revenues being boosted by having a fridge in these small retail situations. So much more likely there. Some good stuff coming up, I think, from Naya in a minute that'll put some more detail on that in terms of user perspectives. But in the market at the moment, what we're seeing is repurposed household appliances being used for these sorts of applications. We're not seeing actual commercial appliances that you typically see in the more advanced economies. they're not appearing very much, other than perhaps through some of the big beverage companies that are building their networks out. Some of the soft drink suppliers are providing some of the more commercial bottle cooler type units into off-grid and weak grid areas. But other than that, it tends to be household appliances that are just simply being used for this other purpose. The third market area that we looked at is the small ice maker, and we really looked at this because of the very high potential. This is offering the potential for a very flexible source of cooling for many different applications in agriculture and food supply chain, building access to markets to small suppliers, small producers, allowing them to get their products to a broader market, to increase the value of those sales by delivering a product that's in a better state when it gets to market. If it's something like fish, which clearly goes off extremely quickly, through to dairy and vegetables and fruit, if they can be kept for more days, the farmer can earn a lot more money from that crop. And so economically, it's a very attractive area, but very few people are doing it yet. Although we have found some really great, very inspiring demonstration plants of ice makers that are making a big impact in these particular areas. So we do think this is a big growth area for the future. But at the moment, very little going on at the moment. Just to illustrate how disruptive the fridge is in this situation, this is looking at a household situation. This is a chart that was published by Dalberg in their 2016 study. This is the watt hours used in a day. Fridge on the right hand side there, very substantial additional power demand, and most home systems are not set up to provide that. Simply are not able to deliver that power, but in the future, yeah, we will see systems with higher power outputs, and I think we'll probably see the power demand of the fridges going down a bit, but the supply possibilities will increase, and we'll see much more compatibility in households. So the challenges, in summary, you've heard most of these before, I won't dwell, but yes, we've got high power demand, especially for ice making, and it might be worth pointing out that power demand goes up with ambient temperature. If we're going up from 30, 32 degrees up to 43 or so, we could see a 50% rise in the power demand for the fridge giving the same service. It's just a matter of physics, I'm afraid. So power demand is going to continue to be a challenge. Economics we've talked about quite a bit. Productive use is a lot more promising. We don't have a dedicated appliances for this market yet. We've heard about some good examples coming through the line now. We want to see more of that in the future. Another problem, a challenge for those trying to get appliances is they don't have transparency of performance. There are no test methods internationally agreed. Data formats are all over the shop. If you're trying to work out what the appliance can do, it's pretty hard now. And harsh conditions give poor reliability. We hear a lot of complaints of failures of fridges in household and, well, particularly commercial applications. They tend to be not repairable, and there's no tech support. So it's a challenging environment generally to set up the market. So what are we going to do about it? Well, the priority needs that we identified were storage, ice making, and transportation. Those are the ones that we focused on. These are the ones that are going to make the biggest difference to future growth as far as we understand. What does this translate to in terms of particular product needs? Well, when we drilled down into the detail, we split the market into the mini and weak grid as contrasted with solar direct drive. When you get into the detail of specifications, the appliances are going to be significantly different in many cases. And so it's necessary to understand which part of this market you're really going for with any particular product specification. But the ones that are going to make the big difference are cabinets for small retail, your sort of bottle coolers or units used in markets, display cabinets, etc. Then we've got the containers for getting produce from the small supplier through to the market to increase revenues. That's going to be an important market to develop. We've got ice makers of different scales depending on the power supply available. And the other one we've mentioned in this table here, the flexible modular chiller systems. This is a really interesting potential market, we think, and I'll say a little bit more about that one now. Shipping fridges to their market is challenging. They tend to be bulky. They tend to be a box of space, really, in many cases, and they get damaged on the way. If you can ship modular components, they are cheaper and easier to move around. They're more robust on the way. But in particular, if you can supply easy to assemble components or modular systems, they can be assembled by local skills, and you can build employment, you can build skills and a local economy that can then access and design and build its cooling systems to meet that local demand. So these sort of modular systems can be adapted. And the University of Hohenheim has done some great work in the last couple of years, actually getting some of this type of equipment on the market and seeing it in use. And they are already seeing a lot of very high interest and capable local people able to assemble and put this stuff to use, adapted to the local demand. So this is quite a high potential economically and to deliver cooling.
Hi, Jeremy.
So,
this is your 1 minute warning.
Okay, right. I won't dwell on that. The technologies that are needed to develop this then are compressors and controllers. At the moment, the market is being developed, is being run on a very narrow range of compressors. And if we're going to see these high efficiency variable speed compressors exploited, we need to have good control systems for those. Modular designs we talked about, I've mentioned enough about that. But control systems will be key to exploiting the fridges as part of a mini grid system or even a community power system. Fridges can be disruptive, they're high power demand, but they're flexible loads. If they're controlled effectively, they can soak up excess power when it's available to store ice, to chill products. When there's a peak demand on the power supply, fridges can be shut down and they will sit there quite happily whilst power is diverted to other uses. And so there's a lot of potential for load management if the control systems are in place to do that. Software to specify and select appliances is also going to be difficult. It's going to be complex, but it's essential to get a system that's going to work. And software to help the an expert system to make those specifications is crucial. And yeah, there's a need for technologies to enable these systems to deliver cooling even in very high ambient temperatures, and that is all going to be necessary to facilitate the market. Yeah, repairability and reliability crucial as well. Circular economy, we need to work towards that in the medium term as well. There's a lot that needs to be done to help support these technologies, as well as just the R&D. We do need to have the test standards, we need to have financing, we need to have the skills to install and maintain. We're going to need to understand the affordability of the systems to help steer in the right direction. And we need to think in advance on waste issues. Fridges could be a challenge in the future to these markets if they're not designed for easy dealing at the end of life. And so we've identified a bunch of technologies which we think are going to be important. We've identified a range of supporting initiatives. Where do we go next? Well, there's at least £1 million of grants being allocated at the moment, and this information will be informing the future grants that are going to be made available. There will be calls, a second call will be coming out in the coming weeks. It will be steered by what we found. We need to look at partnerships with developers, and I think we need to look ahead at a quality assurance framework, perhaps similar to what we've seen with lighting equipment, because it enables policy to support the development of the market in the right direction. Finally, I'll just say that this is where you can sign up to the newsletter, and that is where you will hear about the roadmap when it's available. And I will, with that, hand over to Naya to continue with results of her field trials. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me well and see my screen. Can I just get information from you, Charlie, if everything is okay?
Everything looks great. Thank you.
Looks great.
Thank you. So I'm going to be briefly talking about the Global Leap Awards that Fadzai and Jeremy have briefly mentioned in their presentations, and telling you more about our learnings from field testing that we carried out for off-grid refrigerators. So just to give you a bit of background about the Global Leap program, as Fadzai and Jeremy identified in their presentations, the market for refrigerators is still very nascent, and there are several challenges to scaling this market. So the Global Leap program tries to accelerate adoption of highly efficient products, and we do this by using a competition-based approach to drive innovation in early-stage technologies, while building valuable technical and commercial market infrastructure. So each awards competition round consists of research and planning phase before the launch, and this is then followed by rigorous product testing in accredited laboratories. And we are testing products for energy performance, quality, reliability, and then we put this in front of a panel of expert judges, and ultimately, a winner is announced, and we disseminate this product information, therefore making it easier for distributors who want to introduce these products into the product line to be able to identify suppliers of highly efficient off-grid products. So we have run several Global Leap competitions in the past for TVs, fans, refrigerators, and we are currently in the process of running another awards program for refrigerators as well as solar water pumps. And then one of the outcomes of the awards is we pair this with a results-based financing mechanism to reduce the financial risk associated with large-scale appliance procurement. So we're incentivizing distributors to buy these products, these highly efficient products, in bulk than they would without the presence of this incentive, and therefore trying to push the market forward in this way. So just to give a little bit of context before I dive into the details of the field testing, one of the things that we say a lot is that nobody buys electrons or solar panels. People are buying the services that these electrons and solar panels make possible. So off-grid appliances, including large-scale equipment and productive use appliances and like refrigerators, are things that actually provide these energy services. So by reducing the amount of electrons needed to provide a given energy service, super efficient appliances allow customers to get more energy service from the same power size system and reduce the overall cost of the system required to provide those services. So what this chart is showing us, these are the results of a 2017 analysis from researchers at Humboldt State University. And what they found is that the most energy efficient versions of appliances need less PV and smaller batteries to deliver the same service as inefficient appliances. The chart shows that an appropriately designed DC solar fridge requires approximately 1/10 of the energy delivery system of a conventional refrigerator. And so now diving into the details of our field testing. Given that the market for off-grid refrigerators is quite nascent, the 2017 Global Leap Awards included a unique feature, which was the introduction of 3 innovation prizes. These were prizes for energy efficiency and overall value that was based on the laboratory test results. And the third innovation prize was for appropriate design and user experience. This third portion of the innovation prize was going to be based on field testing. So what we actually wanted to find out is how do these products actually perform in the real world when put in front of consumers. So what we did at the end of laboratory testing, we shipped all products that passed the testing from the laboratory in the Netherlands to Uganda. And so there were 36 products in total, and these products were installed in pre-selected entrepreneur shops. So what market dynamics have indicated that small retail buyers are the most likely early adopters of refrigeration technology, given both the high cost of these products and the potential to generate new revenue sources from the use of the fridges. So we installed remote monitoring systems to collect technical data from the fridges. So we were able to collect instantaneous power consumption, accumulated energy consumption, as well as the daily power available from the solar home system. And this quantitative data was supplemented by qualitative feedback administered via bi-weekly in-person surveys. And these surveys were collecting more nuanced user feedback about their perception of the technology, the ease of use, if there have been any changes in their business. And additionally, we also made some observations on the quality and durability of the product. So what are some of our findings? So power consumption of a fridge is really dependent on the refrigerator settings, the amount of the refrigerant used, the speed regulations of the compressor, as well as the relative humidity and ambient temperature of the location. In the lab, we standardize these metrics in order to be able to make a direct comparison of the refrigerator performance. But in the field, obviously we cannot control for these metrics, but we assume that we anticipate that there'll be a deviation in the energy consumption in the lab as well as in the field. But what we found is that 88% of these tested fridges consumed more energy in the field than in the lab, and the deltas in the performance was as high as 124% in some of them, which is quite shocking. And so what this graph is showing us is that most of the products were consuming more energy, and one of the reasons for this could be that the refrigerators were primarily being used to cool beverages. So the entrepreneurs will try to maximize the utility of their fridges by filling them to capacity with cold drinks. And then throughout the day, they will take out cold drinks and refill the fridge with much warmer drinks to replace those that are being sold. So this constant cycling of cold and hot drinks greatly affects power consumption. And so while more field testing is really needed to understand some environmental and user patterns that could be affecting energy consumption and how products can be better designed to address some of this user behavior. So this inconsistent product performance really does compromise service delivery and can have a negative effect in accelerating the market. So from a qualitative data, we asked users how many hours they expected the fridge to be operating per day, and then in addition, what amount of downtime could they tolerate per week. So what the chart is showing us is that 85% of the users expected the fridge to be operational for between 8 to 24 hours per day, and more than 50% of them could tolerate no more than 6 hours of downtime a week. So this translates to less than 1 hour a day. So if you incorrectly size a refrigerator, so if you size it based on the energy consumption in the lab, but it's actually using more energy in the field, then the secondary implications of this could be that you don't have enough PV and enough battery to actually support this service requirement that the consumers are expecting. And in that sense, this could damage the reputation of off-grid refrigerators as not being reliable or delivering the expected service. And so another thing that we noted, so this was based on kind of like the process of installation and then use of the product as well as serviceability. So user characteristics, obviously, these customers are living in very remote areas where it's difficult to not only deliver the product, but also to access service. A lot of them, unlike AC fridges that are, for the most part, kind of plug and play, off-grid refrigerators will still require some technical expertise to be able to connect the PV, battery, and the fridge together. And so they're looking towards us technician, and technicians in remote areas, what we found is a lot of these technicians were not certified technicians. In addition, these users have very low levels of comfort with appliance technologies. This fridge was the most expensive asset that they had, and they were all first-time users of refrigerators. And their English literacy levels were quite low. So what this means from a manufacturer's perspective is that when you're thinking about your user manuals, you need to put in mind that maybe make use of more pictures than words, and then make the products as plug and play as possible to kind of remove the guesswork from it. And then in addition, building in some appliance protective mechanisms, just because that process of installing the PV, connecting the PV and battery, the whole energy system with the fridge, what we found is these technicians are kind of just using the experience from maybe repairing AC fridges and trying to translate that into connecting a DC fridge. So what impact on the quality of life did these refrigerators have? And so this was very exciting to read, to find out. And we saw that across the board, the revenues for most of these entrepreneurs, the revenues increased on average from $12 a day to $29 a day. And so this was just from the sale of cold drinks. And in addition, the total daily income increased from $29 to $70, because oftentimes when a customer came in to buy a cold drink, they would not only be buying the cold drink, but they would be buying additional products that are being offered by the entrepreneur. In addition, 50% of the entrepreneurs in the study reported to be expanding into a new business line, mostly selling fruit juice, adding fruit juice, or things like milk or some other products that needed cooling that they were not offering before. And so I want to finish with some quotes from our customers. This is one of the testers, Shabani in Bale, where he says customers are coming in great numbers. He's making great sales, and the fridge has really brought change into his life. And Proskovia, she says that this is a secondary benefit of the increased income from the fridge. Getting this fridge has helped me because if a child asks me to buy them a book, I can take money from what the fridge has earned us. The money is there and they use it. So this is just to show, while the sample size was quite small, only 36 entrepreneurs, there still is an opportunity to do additional research and more understanding, and this technology is very much needed and could have greater impact on rural communities. Affordability and energy consumption, as well as all of the other challenges identified by Fadza and Jeremy, also have to be solved before the products are affordable and can be made available to these consumers. And so with that comes to the end of my presentation, and I'm going to pass it on to Philip to tell us more. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you to each of our panelists for those outstanding presentations. As we shift to the Q&A, I'd like to remind our attendees to please submit questions using the question pane at any time. We'll also keep several links on the screen throughout for quick reference that point to where you can find information on other upcoming and previously held webinars. and how to take advantage of the Ask an Expert program. From now, I'd like to pass the presentation back to Charlie so he can proceed with the Q&A. Charlie?
Thank you very much, Philip. I'd like to invite the participants to please submit questions in the questions box. I'm going to ask a couple of pre-prepared questions that we have here to our panelists, and then I'll take a few questions from the audience. The first question is really for any of you who want to take it, but I would like to get your sense of how the different efficient cooling solutions that you've presented today are going to be powered. Jeremy, you touched, for example, on the fact that, you know, in some cases it may be possible to power these technologies with a solar home system, but in other cases it may be more appropriate or more feasible to use a larger component-based solar system, or even possibly a mini grid. So just any reflections that you may have on what kinds of technologies are likely to power refrigeration in particular. I'd be very interested in your reactions to that.
Well, I could kick off an observation from our experience. This is Jeremy. From what we've been hearing from stakeholders, the current solar home systems simply will not be able to provide the power for a fridge in the majority of cases. They're just not built for it. So we are looking at some future power systems, I think, which will have to have upgraded capacity to accommodate a fridge of any reasonable size. Notwithstanding some of these very efficient units that seem to be coming through, but we need to look at the affordability of those very, very high efficiency units. I don't know if Naya perhaps could make any comment on that side of it. But yeah, that was my perspective. I think really the mini grid is where you're going to see better use of these technologies, particularly for a commercial application where you need that reliability of supply as well.
Yeah, for the household applications, I think there's a lot of research now going on, and people are looking into direct drive fridges that don't need the PV systems. I mean, they don't need the battery system. And then also better use of phase change materials that will help with the cooling. So I think I'm going to disagree with you on that one. I think the solar home system companies are also working on bigger battery systems to accommodate larger appliances as the demand begins to shift that way. And then at the same time, manufacturers are being more innovative and trying to figure out how to have fridges that consume less energy. So I think it'll be both. Yeah, from a commercial perspective, there's definitely the opportunity for connecting them to microgrid companies, as you mentioned. And then from a domestic level, I think there's a lot of interesting innovation going on from both the manufacturers and distributors side.
Thanks, Naya. So mini grids and larger component-based solar systems are more likely to be able to power fridges today based on current electricity requirements. But we're also seeing plug-and-play solar home systems kind of getting larger and responding to the challenge of producing enough power. So you think that plug-and-play solutions, will grow, frankly, in response to this market opportunity in future. Thank you. One of our questions from our audience is with regards to whether any of you are aware of refrigerator manufacturers partnering with any of the pay-as-you-go platforms, such as Angaza or Solaris. And I think that links into the related question of where do you see the potential solutions to the consumer financing barrier, which I think everybody recognizes. And ultimately, do you see the end users being primarily households, or do you see SMEs being perhaps a major or even a more important market than households themselves? So I want to ask two linked questions to the panel there. One is around affordability and pay-go, and the other is around whether the ultimate end users are likely to be households or whether we're looking more at SMEs.
Hi, this is Abagi. So I'd like to respond to the question around the opportunities for SMEs, particularly in this space. I think, when we think of just the price point for this product, and this is my personal opinion based on the research that we've done, I definitely think that the SMME market starts to become a more appealing segment to look at. We've heard similar comments from some of the players who are starting to bring in, specifically off-grid appropriate appliances into the space. And we actually did some interesting research around that, where we just tried to look at Kenya as a potential example, looking at the fact that, if we look across the main sectors where we have small shops, restaurants, and bars that provide the right type of economic activity to actually own a refrigerator, there are about 570,000 SMMEs that already report, electricity constraints. And then if we look at market penetration for solar refrigerators in Kenya, at the moment it's currently close to zero, right? But as prices drop and awareness rises, those businesses are likely to be an important market to tap into. We actually anticipate that, if we assume that only 10%, so 1 in 10 of those SMEs need a refrigerator, would still represent a cumulative market of about $20 million. So that type of targeted product design that would cater for some of what Naya was mentioning when she talked about, how long do these types of businesses need to have a refrigerator on for? Can we create a reliable product that's energy efficient, that can run for longer lead times? That really opens up opportunities in sort of those kinds of markets.
Thank you. And we have another couple of questions here, looking over at the policy side. I mean, I think it's very early days for governments to be taking an interest in these nascent and emerging technologies and markets. But have you seen any recent or upcoming policy developments from governments seeking to create an enabling business environment for example, for cold chains or for refrigerators?
I know the Kenya government is currently looking at a minimum energy performance standard for refrigerators, but this is AC refrigerators, or if it was a DC fridge that could also be powered via AC, then it would have to fall into the MAPs. But just DC powered fridges, there is no policy yet. And yet, to your point, I think the market is too nascent and too small for any policy work to be going on.
Yeah, Jeremy here. I'd like to pick up on one of those points that Naya made, that there is definitely policy emerging for the on-grid appliances for refrigerators. And I mean, I know in recent years Ghana has been quite active on this, because they became very concerned about the dumping of old fridge products from developed markets going into Ghana as grid access was growing. People wanted a fridge, they were getting second-hand appliances quite cheaply, which were creating a waste problem and were very poor efficiency. They were taking a lot of power from the grid. And yeah, I think we do have to be wary as we're promoting the growth of the market for fridges and cold chain food. I think the policy framework's got to keep pace with this. It's got to, the governments in these countries that are trying to increase access, I think they need a robust framework to control this and avoid products which are rapidly being banned in a lot of the more economically advanced regions now through high efficiency requirements. We want to avoid those being dumped into the economies where people are, there's a lot of demand for these appliances, but not the regulatory frameworks. So yeah, I do think it's important for us to work with the policymakers to make sure this keeps pace. And looking ahead to the waste implications as well, there's some really great work going on in that field. In certainly a number of African countries, looking at the setting up recycling facilities and looking at the needs for that. So yeah, it's absolutely right to identify that as a need to focus on in the future.
So just to chime in a little bit on this, beyond just policy, because I think we do tend to get stuck on, do we have the right types of tax exemptions? Is there, removed duty, import duties, etc. But one of the really interesting insights we got from a lot of the industry associations that either deal in the renewable or solar energy space is that where some of those frameworks are available, there are challenges in actually implementing those exemptions, for example, at customs authorities. So in addition to governments, who are quite progressive, actually taking on board some of those exemptions or creating incentives, there's also a need to actually train the right type of officials to understand what is an off-grid product. How do I assess that this is different from a traditional appliance that would come into the market, right? And I think there's definitely some investment that needs to be made there to upskill and train individuals around that.
Thank you, Fadzai. I think that's a really important point you've raised there about the importance of implementation beyond just policy. I'd like to close with a question for Naya, if I may. Both Fadzai and Jeremy, I think, gave us a good overview of the market barriers that are being faced around consumer and distributor access to finance, around technology, around business models, around technical assistance needed, capacity building. But Naya, I feel like you're sort of closest to the companies, if you like, through your work providing results-based financing. And I would like to ask you, from the conversations that you've had with businesses receiving results-based financing, if you have a clear sense of what additional forms of support you feel they would most value. I mean, would they like support around building out the evidence base for the impact of these appliances so that they can do more informed sales and marketing? Is it more to do with capacity building? If you could identify their top kind of non-financial need, what would you say that was?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think the one that always stands out is kind of like market segmentation. So understanding what type of product meets what kind of user and at what price point, and that's related to the expected service delivery, right? So, for example, as I mentioned in my presentation earlier, a lot of the entrepreneurs were using their fridges to sell beverages and cycling through this constant opening and closing to access the beverages was causing increased power consumption. So, for example, if manufacturers just design fridges with better compartments that kind of like met this use case scenario for entrepreneurs. So you could have a compartment for like cold drinks and another one for warm drinks, so that you're only opening one of those compartments at any one time, for example, right? So, and then the second thing is just related to affordability. It's okay, at what price point does it make sense to finance the product for a business, and how much revenue would they be able to generate, and how long would it take them to pay back the product? And then even if it's for domestic use, if it's for a group like a savings group or a farmers group, what are their refrigeration needs, and how willing are they to pay for the product, and how are they able to pay for the product? Yeah, so it just boils down to market segmentation. That's like the number one need that they have. And then from a manufacturer's perspective, it's just getting understanding the users better.
Right, got it. So it's a lot to do with understanding what usage looks like in the field, and then the implications of that for design and for business models as well.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Well, with that, we're at time, so I'd like to close the Q&A. Apologies to our participants who sent through questions that we've not been able to answer. I'll take a look at that list, and I'll farm out the questions that we haven't been able to respond to our participants, who will respond to them on email. So you can expect a response to your questions following this webinar. With that, I'd like to just close with a big thank you to our panelists for excellent presentations and a great kind of summary discussion. I only wish we had a lot more time, as there's clearly a lot to discuss here, but I think that only serves to remind us that we should watch this space for the forthcoming publications and the more detailed discussions that will take place around them, in due course over the next few months. And with that, I'll hand back to Philip to close the webinar.
Great, thank you again. On behalf of the Clean Energy Solutions Center, I'd like to extend a thank you to all of our expert panelists and to our attendees for participating in today's webinar. We very much appreciate your time and hope in return that there were some valuable insights that you can take back to your ministries, departments, or organizations. We also invite you to inform your colleagues and those in your networks about Solutions Center resources and services, including no-cost policy support through our Ask an Expert service. I invite you to check the Solutions Center website if you would like to view the slides and listen to a recording of today's presentation, as well as previously held webinars. Additionally, you will find information on upcoming webinars and other training events. We are also now posting webinar recordings to the Clean Energy Solutions Center YouTube channel. Please allow for about 1 week for the audio recording to be posted. Finally, I would like to kindly ask you to take a moment to complete the short survey that will appear when we conclude the webinar. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you again at future Clean Energy Solutions Center events. This concludes our webinar.